All right. Well, welcome. I just heard the church bells from First Baptist Church around the corner. So I think that means it's 3 o'clock here in Westerwood. And we're really glad to have you for Try This Tuesday with the Greensboro Chamber of Commerce. My name is Cecelia Thompson, and I'm Executive Director of Action Greensboro and the host of every Tuesday's Try This Tuesday call, which has been a really joyful addition to my life while staying at home and working from home really since mid-March. Try This Tuesday was developed with the idea that we all needed to integrate new things into our lives while living at home and staying in our neck of the woods, and also bringing our work into our home. And so we developed this to be a fun day with the Chamber to talk about exciting things that were happening in the community and new tricks and techniques that we can integrate into our lives while social distancing. So if you've missed any of the Try This Tuesday calls or any of the Chamber action calls over the last 5 weeks, they are all archived online at greensboro.org/COVID-19. Maybe you want to relive last week's Greensboro Grasshoppers game online, or you're missing the Paloma and Margarita recipe that we featured on Cinco de Mayo. Those are all archived. So we welcome you to go back and enjoy those calls. I also want to remind you that you can follow the Greensboro Chamber on social media at Greensboro Chamber or at GSO Chamber. You can also find Action Greensboro on social media, and I hope that you will, at Action Greensboro on Twitter and Facebook, or Action GSO. So before we get started, I have a couple commercials that I do every week, and they're still just as important this week as they were last week. So first, if you have yet to fill out your census form, the time is still now. An accurate count means that we have funding for our community and congressional representation in Washington, D.C. And so it's important that everybody fills out the census to help us have funding right now and over the next 10 years. If you haven't done that yet, we ask that you do so. It's super easy. And as we were reminded a couple weeks ago, it's also a great opportunity to do it with your kids. It's an opportunity to talk about civic engagement and opportunities with the federal government. So do the census. The second commercial is that DGI still has an ongoing fundraiser. You make a contribution to DGI. Those dollars are then turned to purchase meals from downtown restaurants that need our business right now. And then those meals are sent to Cone Health workers that deserve much needed, delicious meals right now. They're on the front lines. And so I see it as a triple bottom line. So please go on to DGI's website if you can and donate a couple dollars. Finally, Cone Health is ramping back up again for elective surgeries, and they are in need of blood donations. And so they go through a third party called One Blood. If you go to oneblood.org/donate, you can sign up to donate blood, and you can do that just off of Elam Avenue across from Wesley Long Hospital. And so consider that. Yesterday, I watched a online Facebook live show from Kevin Lundy with the Community Foundation on how to be a philanthropist. And he reminded us that we're all philanthropists in our own way. And so whether you're giving of your blood or your time or knocking on a neighbor's door, we can all really support our community right now. And we encourage you to think about how to do that every day. So those are my commercials. Today, we're really excited to be talking about history in the making. We're all living history right now, and we can all think about how we can archive our lives through journaling or photography or other new mediums, and so that future historians can learn about this time in the future. So I was thinking about this, particularly as it related to an article that I read in the New York Times in kind of mid-March as all of this was starting to unfold. And the New York Times article, and I'll paraphrase, said, Anne Frank listened in an Amsterdam attic on March 28, 1944, as the voice of the Dutch Minister of Education came crackling in over the radio in London. And he said, "Preserve your diaries and letters." And Frank wasn't the only one listening. And so the New York Times, if you go on their website now, have just an amazing catalog of journals that people kept because of that request that you can now look through, and you can learn about those times in World War II. And of course, right now, our lives are very different than theirs was, but there's also this idea that we can pass along what life looks like so we can learn from our experiences. And so we've got some experts today that are joining us to talk about how Greensboro is archiving our time right now in this pandemic and how we might think about contributing to those archives. So I'm going to make some introductions from our special guest. Today we have two people from the Greensboro History Museum that's located right downtown in the Cultural District. Carol Gorsey Hart is the director of the Greensboro History Museum. She has an MA in anthropology from Indiana University and previously was the adjunct professor in anthropology at SUNY Farmingdale on Long Island. She's also has been the executive director of the Vanderbilt Museum and the Planetarium in New York. So welcome, Carol. Glenn Perkins has been a curator of community history at the Greensboro History Museum since 2017. He earned his MA in U.S. History from UNCG and previously worked at Preservation, North Carolina. So welcome, Glenn and Carol. We're also excited to have two of my friends join us that are working on an exciting project in Westerwood, archiving what's happening, I should say here in Westerwood, because I live here also, Betsy Blake and Ann Cassity. Betsy has a fine art degree from Guilford College with minors in business management and English and a concentration in communication. She was very busy at Guilford. Betsy's always been drawn to authenticity and nonfiction and meaning making. In 2003, Betsy co-produced a short film about a historic peace church that didn't get along amongst themselves. And it went on to be screened in small gatherings around the country, as well as Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. It became a part of the curriculum at Oxford University in the UK and some colleges here in the States. Betsy's worked in marketing-related fields for 24 years and has her own little marketing company for 10 years. She calls it her little marketing company. She focuses on working with socially conscious small and mid-sized businesses. On the side, and integrated, photography has been a long-time love for Betsy and has quickly grown into an offshoot of her main business over the last 6 years. Her photojournalism work has surrounded immigration and has been featured on NBC, CNN, Sojourners Magazine, and NPR Online. So welcome, Betsy. And finally, last but not least, Ann Cassity. Ann, for the last 30 years, has made her career as a graphic designer and creative director. Originally from Maine, she received an English degree from Smith College and got her start at a trade magazine in New York City. A decade or 2 moves later, Ann and her husband, Mark, found their home in Greensboro. Ann has worked with many advertising agencies, businesses, brands large and small. She has a passion for finding creative solutions, especially working conceptually and collaboratively with other creatives to tell a story. So welcome to my four special guests to talk about history happening now. I want to start off with Carol and Glenn. Can you share a little bit about the Greensboro History Museum's project, History Happening Now?
I'm very happy to, and thanks, Cecelia, for letting us be part of this conversation. It's really great to be able to share what we're doing. You said it yourself, we're seeing history happen in front of our eyes. The pandemic's really transforming just things that we took for granted daily, and we don't really know what it's going to look like on the other side. What things are going to really change, and will we look back and say, oh, that was a real turning point. And so we decided we really needed to start actively, deliberately, and wholeheartedly collecting people's diverse experiences about what was going on at this moment. And fortunately, we're lucky we've got all these fantastic, lovely online tools and cool ways to connect with people that we maybe didn't have before. But we really did start out with some of the basic stuff. We asked Rodney Dawson, who's our education curator, he sent just diaries to educator friends of his and healthcare professional folks that he knows. And we talked to our museum volunteers, the folks who welcome people when they come into the museum when the building's open. They want to remain active as well. So we said, well, listen, guys, tell us what you're doing. Share what you're doing. Take pictures of what's going on in your neighborhood, in your family, and in your household. And they started and sharing some things as well. And so pretty much we want to open it up to anybody to be able to participate. We've already had dozens of responses online, and we've got a web page that you can go to with kind of a basic form about participating, sort of whether you want to participate now or kind of work on diaries and participate later. And so folks can go to greensborohistory.org/history-now. So we're really connecting with people right now, starting to collect some stories, and looking forward to continuing this into summer when we hope to do some oral history interviews with teachers and essential workers and volunteers and more.
Awesome. So you spoke to a little bit about why this is important, but I also was wondering, Carol, if this is based off of other projects or similar projects that's happened in the past here in Greensboro or maybe in other communities.
Well, communities all across the country are doing similar projects, but in part, as in the quote that you mentioned, we know from reading accounts from previous generations, it's an important way to have a better understanding of what happened, what was life like. A lot of times, the big important things of life in our times are documented, but it's those day-to-day in and out experiences that are harder to find unless someone's written letters or kept a diary or kept a journal. And throughout much of our recorded history, these recordings are of a personal nature. At the History Museum, we have some wonderful archival collections of letters and correspondence and journals and diaries. What really prompted me, though, was thinking, we're living through a pandemic now. Oh my God, this is like the worst thing that's ever happened. It's so terrible. But then you start as a historian, wait a minute, has something similar to this happened before? And how did people deal with it? How did it change life? And that's where we started looking in our archives to see what we had documenting a similar period in the past.
So it sounds like you have prepared a video and some pieces of some diaries in the past. I know you wanted to share it, and I'd love to do that. Do you want to kind of prompt everybody from what it is and what's expected with this video and maybe some to come?
Yeah, so, and we'll hear a little bit about it in the video itself, but we have the diaries of a woman who was married to the first Presbyterian minister and kept journals for her very long life, from before the Civil War through right after World War I. She writes about keeping journals her whole adult life. At the museum, we have those from the last 20 years of her life, which includes the World War I and the Spanish influenza time period. And seeing her account of what it was like to be in Greensboro in 1918 as the Spanish flu starts to take hold is incredibly fascinating, interesting, and certainly connects to the life we're living today.
Well, this video, I think, is hot off the press, and so we're excited to share what Carol has put together to share those diaries. So I'm going to share my screen and start the video.
A terrible flu is sweeping the country and many are dying. People are stuck at home. They can't go to school or even church. The streets are eerily quiet and people are afraid. They don't know what the coming months will bring. Not only is America dealing with a pandemic, but the World War is still raging. The year, 1918. And this is the journal of Greensboro's Mary Kelly Watson Smith. Hart, director of the Greensboro History Museum. We have lots of things at the museum. We have tiny little buttons to lunch counters to giant fire engines. We have photographs and books and documents and diaries like Mary Kelly Watson Smith. Mary was born in 1836, moved to Greensboro in 1859 as the wife of the first Presbyterian minister, and kept journals her entire life.
We're really lucky to have the diaries from the last 20 years of her life. That includes the World War I period and the time of the Spanish flu. Right now, as we're living through a pandemic, not as unprecedented as we might have thought, I wondered what stories from 100 years ago do I wish I knew, and remembered we had the diaries of Mary. Now, reading those diaries is a little bit of a challenge, but I'm getting there, and I'm really excited to be able to share with you some of what she had to say about that time period. October 2nd. Everything and everybody excited and alarmed at the epidemic of Spanish influenza, which seems taking the entire country at one sweep. Many deaths occurring in the camps, which is heartbreaking. Fanny Barringer, Mrs. John Waldrop, died Sunday night of typhoid fever, which she contracted away on a visit, ending in the pneumonia. Her husband and father are left utterly desolate and in their home. We drove out to the cemetery and saw the beautiful spot where she lay, emerald green, and her mother's grave, as well as the handsome stone and her own resting place covered in the exquisite designs. Oh, the sadness of it. Dr. and Mrs. W.P. Beale have gone on to Washington to see their son, Tom, who is very ill with influenza. 13 casualties of North Carolina boys reported this morning from those terrible drives of the Allies in France. October 3rd, my first cousin, Lieutenant Colonel Mason Magruder, surgeon of the U.S. Marines, is visiting in Charlottesville after many years. Margaret has taken the leadership in part of the campaign for Hospitality Liaison for Soldiers in France, a call which stirs every woman's heart in Greensboro and is meeting with a cordial response. 412 sheets, 889 hand towels, bath towels, 1,700 handkerchiefs, and 82 napkins is the amount required of Greensboro. More than 90 churches have been communicated with, Jew and Gentile, Romanists, and the leading ladies of each put in charge. The normal girls responded at once with $50, the White Oak chapter sending $200, and the children 250 handkerchiefs. The Florence Nightingales, who are colored ladies, very willingly undertook the napkins. October 4th. Dr. and Mrs. Beale arrived last night with Tom's body, and he was laid to rest this afternoon in Greenhill. A large attendance at Westminster, where services were conducted by Mr. Hodgin. I'm so glad I got to share some of Mary's diary with you. Join us on the journey as we explore her diaries and the other stuff that we have here, the stuff of history.
Well, thank you, Carol, for sharing that video with us. It's just amazing to see everything that's in the History Museum's archive, and especially to be able to sort of glean on what's happened in the past. And it sounds like there'll be potentially more videos to come. Is that right?
Yeah, there'll be months worth of videos. As I said, she wrote a lot, and the next episode will start on October 6th, where she says the streets are eerily quiet, the churches are closed down, the schools, nobody can leave. And again, it seems reminiscent of today. And I just liked how they talked about the community pitching in and the children, and we get to see these connections. We tried to pull from our archives photographs And I went out to the cemetery and took a picture, but to get more of a sense of the community that she's talking about. And of course, the more that you have, the better. The other thing I want to highlight, which makes our History Happening Now project so important, is we're going to be able to see life 100 years ago through Mary's eyes and through the eyes of her acquaintances and friends. But clearly that's a very narrow slice of life. She's at this point an elderly, prominent white lady. What was going on with the White Oak working class people? What about those Florence Nightingale ladies? We don't have a lot of information about them. And one point in doing this is maybe people out there do have some old letters and maybe we'll acquire those. But it's also to be mindful that today, while we have the opportunity to save those diaries and journals, let's make sure it's not from just one slice of our community, but we're making sure as much as we can that we have a broad representation of ethnicities and ages and women and men, and just so we get a fuller sense of what life is like today.
Yeah, I think that's really true. When you were talking about the number of handkerchiefs, it sort of was like this reflection of how many masks have been sewn and how many shields have been created at the forge downtown, and sort of what will that look like as we look back, or others will look back, I should say, in 100 years. And also the question I think that a lot of us are asking about, how can we be really sensitive to making sure that we're archiving many perspectives of the diverse community that's living here in Greensboro right now. So Glenn or Carol, can you share maybe any entries that you think are interesting right now that you've already received through the project?
Sure, Glenn.
Yeah, well, like I said, we've got over several dozen different entries coming in, and they've been from all kinds of people. They've been some from students. I think a teacher found out about the project and then set some of her students to share some of what they've been doing. So there's some pictures of some dancing with friends on phones, and then there were a lot of examples from people who are talking about their neighborhoods and, sort of social distancing parties in the street, or having, cocktails in the driveway and waving at your friends from a distance. There's examples of people sewing masks, a lot of people sort of sharing that work that they're doing to try to, create something to share with other people and to support the work that essential workers are doing. And even some of those, there was just recently one that came in from somebody who worked at Home Depot talking about what it's like to be there. So, we're really excited to have those, and we're excited to be connecting with other partners and organizations in order to keep doing this work. Guilford Education Alliance just started a project where they are sending out diary materials to a lot of schools with Backpack Beginnings, so that GCS students can share their thoughts. There's writing prompts that go with those. And so we're going to work with them with some of that material. Guilford College History Department is doing a summer session course, a special History Happening Now online summer course. We're working with them. So, there's a lot of, we're doing a lot of reaching out too, to try to connect with folks who can help us find people who have these interesting stories.
Sure. Someone has mentioned, and I do encourage everybody to type in questions if you have some in the chat feature, that the A&T Library Archive may have some documents and diaries from the Spanish flu. So something to think about. So another question, as you mentioned about giving diaries to students and other forms of media, obviously we have different ways of documenting things now that people didn't 100 years ago, from playlists maybe on Spotify, or run routes that people are taking right now through their iWatch, or videos like this, or TikTok. Are you looking for any and all kinds of archives? Is that of interest to you in terms of new media?
We are looking for all kinds of material. We're talking to UNCG libraries about ways to archive web content, all these signs and activities and things that go up on the web. Sometimes those can get lost. Even hard to find. So they have some tools and techniques for archiving that kind of stuff. And I really love the idea of documenting people's running routes or walking routes, because just think, if we had that from 1918, what that could tell us about sort of how people went around downtown. So I think that, those sort of, those maps and those magic recorders that are in our pockets a lot of the time can tell a lot of interesting things. So, we're really open to a lot of these ideas and projects. And there's some cool projects nationwide that we're kind of trying to connect with in order to share these things really widely.
Great. Matthew from elsewhere, who's new to Greensboro, so welcome, Matthew. He's asking, is the content being shared with the local school system, and are they being invited to gather children's accounts of this time in addition to the Guilford Educational Alliance diaries?
Yes. Rodney, our Curator of Education, has been working really closely with the schools. And one of the reasons I'm excited about this project is that the YouTube videos and the reading of these diaries will go along with the history happening now and collecting the new diaries and be incorporated into lesson plans and to online teaching that and online field trips, virtual tours that we'll be doing with classes, where we can connect in a broad way, diaries and journals from the past, creative writing of the students now, other ways to document through music and art. And so it's a really exciting time. I also quickly wanted to comment on one of the questions about A&T. One of the interesting things about doing this project is we did a exhibit on World War I at the museum a couple of years ago, because it was the 100th anniversary. And in doing the research for that exhibit, we brought forward a lot of material. We actually did feature a woman, African-American woman connected to A&T, who was a member of the Florence Nightingales, but we tried so hard to get more information and pictures about the other women of the Florence Nightingales, and worked with the African-American community and churches, and we couldn't. There were other names listed. Does anyone have a picture or a letter? And there wasn't anything. And even at A&T, there's a lot of more military accounts and important historical stuff, but how the women were living their everyday lives, when you're in the moment or even last, it doesn't seem as important or as historic to know, oh, I went to the store and couldn't get eggs today. Sometimes that doesn't seem as important, but today, that's the kind of thing that I really am interested in. One of the things, and this is maybe a little bit more of my anthropology background, but I think it's fascinating to look at what foods, for example, are in short supply and the empty shelves. And within the safety of not going out too much, if I could, I would go from community to community to community and see what it is that is the most important food, because I think it would be different. Is it bread to make white bread? Is it beans to make whatever? It's going to change and give us some insights into the people who live in that community. So it's the day-to-day stuff that I wish we had from the past. And sometimes when you look back and wow, I wish I knew that from the past, you think, well, maybe we should record and preserve that today, so that in another 100 years, when people look back, they'll have a better idea. The other thing, quickly before I forget, is we're really interested in collecting objects, this stuff of history as well. And we have reached out and connected to preserve some of the masks, particularly some of the masks that are people have been making, the denim masks, and the sanitizing bottle are some of the gin manufacturers are producing. Isn't that a cool thing to save? Signage, the signs that we've seen out there out of toilet paper or whatever, and other material culture. Again, we don't want to be taking any PPE that someone could be using, but at some point there'll be an appropriate time. And also to connect that with a story. And again, as a local history museum, for us, it's not so much the stuff, it's the stories the stuff tells and the people it connects. So we're really excited in the future, hopefully once things settle down and people can move around a little bit more, to start, in addition to the diary and the journaling and the oral histories and video histories, to actually start corralling and preserving some of the physical culture that is coming forward at this time.
Yeah, well, I think those are great prompts for our listeners and maybe the friends of our listeners to really think about maybe collecting things, physical objects, or maybe some journal prompts around what they're buying at the grocery store. I can't say how many times people have looked for yeast lately because there's so much sourdough making. And so maybe those will be the pieces of history that we remember now. So I want to switch gears a little. Carol and Glenn, don't go anywhere, but I want to switch gears to a grassroots project that's happening in the Westerwood neighborhood called the Westerwood Porch Portrait Project, which I would love for Betsy and Anne to share a little bit about what the origin of the project is, and then of course what the goals are. So Betsy, do you want to share a little about the project?
Sure. Yeah, it was kind of one of those meant to be things. I know for me, I've had a step back with the photography part of my business, and I've just really missed it. And was thinking about, it is a historic time, and it's the census time. And I know in my own life, it's a time of taking stock of who am I, where am I, what is this space about? And so I was kind of thinking about it, praying about it. And then Cecelia contacted me, and she said, I can't even remember your original email, but something about like, wouldn't it be interesting to capture this photographically? And I got so overwhelmed by the details of what that would mean. And we just connected, and really, really quick, she's like, I'll do all the organizational work if you'll do the photography. And then Anne had contacted me, just like, if you guys need any help, I'd love to help. And it's evolved from there. And Anne has a really fascinating piece, kind of a Humans of Westerwood story gathering component. And so we just went from there.
So Betsy, the porch portraits are a national trend right now. I think that we're seeing them all over the place. I saw that Morgan Radford, who's the Greensboro native, is on NBC, and she did a piece last Sunday about the Porch Portraits Project. And what I saw in that is that there's such an interesting lens and an artist perspective on these projects. And so I know that you have a lens on what you're trying to capture in the Westerwood neighborhood. And so can you share a little bit about how you're prompting people in the neighborhood to prepare or really not to prepare for their portraits, and sort of what lens you want to have on this as a piece of the archive that we'll share with the Greensboro History Museum?
Yeah. I think the goal has been for this to be as natural as possible, which is totally unnatural. And I know from my background with documentary film, there's sort of a story at hand, but I never want to go in too heavy-handed. And so one of the things that I think has been most meaningful has been to show up and kind of check in with people. Like, how are you? What are the themes that are coming up for you? What are you facing? What's your day-to-day like? And some people have shared really, I think most people have actually shared really freely, and that's been so beautiful. And then just have an opportunity for people to sit. And I think even for me, I don't like having my photo taken, which is ironic, but just wanting to encourage people to be present with what's present with them. Is this stressful? How is it exciting? Are they having quarrels with their siblings? Are they playing more? You know, whatever that looks like, and then allowing space to grab the photos.
Yeah, and we've had really interesting, I will say I've joined Betsy on these calls, and we've had so many interesting interactions with people, from recent graduates of UNCG to doctors, of course, that work for Cone. And so just hearing these perspectives, and those that had to come back from a study abroad trip and are now as a college student living with their parents. So just different perspectives. So Betsy, we were wondering if you might be willing to share a couple sneak peeks of the images that you've taken.
Yay, I would love to.
Great.
All right, let's see here. And all right. Yeah, so I was just going to share just a few here. And let's see. So this is a family who, probably like a lot of us, are stuck at home together a lot and feeling some feelings. And I just thought were so cute. And I have a lot of siblings, and I just appreciated the interaction there between these twins. Get down here. This is a woman who had just gotten her PhD, had kind of had her head down in the books, and was so excited about having free time and interacting with friends and family. And then the quarantine hit. So she had a little celebration to herself when we arrived, and had her own balloons and everything. And it was just so sweet to see her and to witness that moment for her. I think this is Matthew, who's on our call, the new director of Elsewhere. And I feel for you, Matthew, because they just moved here right before the pandemic hit. And so it was awesome to be there with their family on their porch. I just have a couple more here. This is a woman who has been taking ballroom dancing classes and had switched to doing that alone at home, and is sort of navigating seeing kids and grandkids. And then another thing, I just like this photo, just a family in the neighborhood. And I'll just share one more. And I think that the experience for a lot of us is that it's sort of real, but it's not real. And I don't know what the photographs will look like if we were to do this a year from now. And I think that's part of capturing this imagery at this point. And then the last photo I'll share is of a physician here who is treating COVID patients, and his daughter or his child and his wife can't be there with him. And so it's sort of this snapshot of where, I don't know if this is the beginning or the middle or the end, but this is where we are as a neighborhood right now. And yeah, that's a little bit about where we are.
Betsy, thank you for sharing. I know we've gotten a lot of chat messages really talking about how powerful the images are and how beautiful they are. And I will say, as somebody that's gotten to trek around the neighborhood with you and experience the photography sessions, it has been really authentic. I think Matthew didn't even know we were coming. We just saw him on the porch and said, hey, would you participate? And so he was very in the moment and authentic, and then hearing the stories. And Betsy's just done such a great job of asking people to, I think I'll paraphrase what you always say, Betsy, is take a deep breath and think about your pandemic experience. And she gets the camera ready, and on the count of 3, they're able to express internally or externally whatever that feeling is. And so when that little boy put his fist up to his twin brother, it really spoke to what life is like. I think for good reasons he was giggling while he did it, and challenging reasons in terms of what we're living like today. And so it's just a snap in time. So Anne has joined our little team of documentaries, and she offered to do, I think, a really difficult challenge of provide captions to these images. And so Anne, can you share your experience of touching base with each of these neighbors and collecting their thoughts and maybe a couple of previews in terms of what we got so far?
Sure, I'd love to. First, I think the images are so powerful on their own, but it's become apparent to all 3 of us who are closer to this right now that people have more behind them. They have more story. And so I've been trying to invite them to share more of what's really going on. And it's been interesting to hear what people tell you, because you don't get everything from just the picture, or it just builds it into something much bigger. So it's been fun to collect these stories. And I think stories are so integral to how we understand our world, and they help us to integrate all this into our experience. So, they're just amazing. I can just share a few snippets from some of the stories we've gotten so far. I had one neighbor of ours wrote this part, and this was so wonderful because it links to our history already here in Greensboro so strongly. My oldest son came from New York, where he lives, works, and is a student at the Fashion Institute of Technology, finishing the year online. After self-quarantine, he began volunteering with Hudson's Hill, sewing medical masks through their partnership with Burlington Fabrics and operating out of Revolution Mill. Coincidentally, my maternal grandmother, Gamma, sewed in Greensboro as a volunteer during wartime, while my grandfather served overseas. Gamma often recalled the ravages of polio in this area, which took her and my mother as a child to Oxford for a summer to avoid the epidemic. That always seemed so surreal to me, and yet here we live in a similar time with nowhere to go. From another neighbor, as a public defender, I work in courts and jails and prisons, but have not gone to any of these in 2 months. Our only hearings have been held by Zoom. My colleagues and I do a very person-intensive job that now entails no direct interaction with people. It's been completely turned upside down. From another neighbor, our neighborhood is awesome. We've had a lot of this kind of thing. We've had a lot of our neighbors telling us how great our neighborhood is. Our neighborhood is awesome. So many creative take charge women reacted immediately with massive mask sewing and shield making efforts. I've witnessed the gatherings of foodstuffs, helping each other as well as harder hit areas of the city. My neighbors wear masks. They stay at home. They help each other. We recognize that caring for others and keeping them safe by being careful and cautious supports our community and improves every life. So I think those are just representative of some of what we're receiving, and I'm enjoying getting to know our neighbors this way.
Yeah, it's been amazing to get to know our neighbors, both by taking the pictures, but also by hearing or reading their descriptions of their life right now. And so, Anne, thanks for sharing a couple of those. I see there may be some Westerwood folks on the call now, and so if you haven't submitted your response, we're looking for you. So I'm curious from Betsy and Anne, if others are listening and they're thinking, maybe I could start my own grassroots project. This seems pretty simple. What would your advice be?
I'd say do it. This has been I didn't realize how awesome this is going to be. And I've had more in-depth, soulful conversations with neighbors than I think I ever, like complete strangers in my neighborhood. I've passed houses 1,000 times and never connected on this level. And I think that Cecelia's been witness too. I think night after night, people just saying like, this is so fun, or this is really real or really good. And I'm so glad just to connect. And so even if the photos are bad, even if something terrible happens, just get out there and do it. And I was so excited to hear Carol say just a call for diversity, and it's so needed. And so just do it, get out there. And I'm so grateful to Anne and Cecelia, and teamwork makes the dream work. So get good volunteers if you can.
I would second what Betsy's saying. It's been a phenomenal experience for me. And on a personal note, my work has slowed down significantly during this time because my clients are dead in the water, most of them. And so this is really feeding me personally, which is great. But also the whole connecting thing. I mean, during this pandemic, when we feel so disconnected by spatially, it's wonderful to be able to connect in these other ways, and we need it.
Yeah, I think we felt that when we visited our neighbors. They've all just been grateful that we're doing the project and that they can be a part of it, but they're also just grateful to see other humans and talk to us for the 15 minutes that we stand in their front yard 12 feet away taking their pictures. And it's been really energizing. And so Betsy and I have, I think, visited 35 homes in Westerwood in the last week, and we've got several more to go. And so while our backs are tired from pulling the wagon up the hills, it's been really rewarding and exciting, and to be able to connect our neighbors right now. So the question that we had next, which of course is also in our chat feature, is when can we see and read the photos and the captions?
This is a hot question, and I was reviewing this. I will be releasing an online gallery in 4 to 6 weeks. I don't know how to I feel funny giving a plug for my own like Facebook page, but Betsy Blake Photography. But I don't know how we're going to announce it, but I'll be doing an online a gallery, and we have some ideas for some potential plans beyond that in the works.
Very good. Carol and Glenn, after seeing the photos and hearing some of the captions, I'm curious about what you're thinking.
Well, I think it's, that's really those are the stories and that sort of intimate moments that we want. We can go back to the kind of thing that you get a little bit from the work that Carol's been researching on 1918, but, she'll tell you probably that it's hard to have those faces. So I think having those faces as well as the voices that you're capturing in the captions are tremendous. And wouldn't it be great to really have these kinds of images across the city, in Noco Park and Bembo Park and Lindley Park and Westerwood and all over the city to really give a real perspective of what's going on in different communities.
Yeah, I think getting the faces and their stories and how people feel about things, that's the emotional part is sometimes what gets missing as history and time goes on. And by capturing it in this way, I think we will help future generations understand better who we are. And it's just wonderful. And we can see this history. It's not just about this end product that we're going to preserve, but it's also about the process and the process of this kind of Zoom meeting and the work you're doing is really important for community and for the connectedness, as you mentioned. And as we're figuring out moving forward, how do we relate to each other? How do we connect? How do we be a community in this new reality? It's going to be really important. So thank you for that work.
Thank you, Betsy and Anne. Tara Sandercock with the Community Foundation is saying, leak it out, Betsy, build your following, and building stronger neighborhoods, which is an initiative the Community Foundation can help with that. And she can connect you to Sadie Blue, who's working with neighborhoods across the city. So maybe we can inspire other neighborhoods across the community to do similar projects. We'll welcome any other questions for our special guests today. I will say just a personal little story is that last summer I was renovating the house that I'm sitting in Westerwood, and as the roofers were pulling the eaves off the house, about 40 or so old photographs fell onto the front lawn over the 4th of July weekend, and they were images from the 40s. And they're just these captivating photos. I shared them with Betsy at the beginning of the Westerwood project, just to really think about what kinds of expressions we were looking for people, not necessarily just traditional family portraits. And one of the things I've always wanted about those pictures was who they were. Who are these people, and what were their stories, and where were they in their lives, and especially the photos that were taken from what I could figure out in Greensboro. And luckily I was able to find a family member of the pictures family members and give them back. But it really made me reflect about what I would want people to know about what we're all up to in Greensboro today. And so I think we're all doing that. I would welcome anybody on this call to share with your friends, with your family members in Greensboro, with your neighbors, about contributing in some way to the Greensboro History Museum's archives, whether that's in an artifact like a shield or a mask or a jar of yeast or a hand sanitizer jar, or maybe it's a diary entry that you make over the next couple of weeks as we move into phase 2, and maybe the anxiety that you're feeling about re-entering the community that I think so many of us are feeling right now, or maybe the excitement that we're all feeling right now to hopefully reconnect with our friends in the days and months to come. So I just want to thank you all for joining us on this Zoom call and appreciate what you're doing to archive our community. So before we wrap up, I just want to do a quick plug for tomorrow's session, which is Work From Home Wednesday with Deborah Hooper. Deborah is bringing on a panel on PPP loans and how we can understand the forgiveness process of those PPP loans, what sort of things that we need to be doing to prepare for that. And I think that's going to be a really informative call to anyone who is looking to who has gotten a PPP loan and working through that into our large business and small business community. So welcome you on the call tomorrow at 3 o'clock, same Zoom login for Work From Home Wednesday. And this, I think, is our 6th Try This Tuesday, and we are adjusting to move back into our offices in the next couple of weeks. And so this may be the last Try This Tuesday, or it might not. I haven't really decided what this holds. And so it may sunset and may come back in a new iteration. If you're interested in collaborating on this really exciting thing that I've gotten the opportunity to do, I welcome ideas and collaborators. But until then, I hope to continue to reconnect with you through Action Greensboro's program of work and through our social media, and of course when our office opens back, hopefully soon. So until then, stay well, stay healthy, archive history, and see you tomorrow for Work From Home Wednesday. Thanks, guys.